Hello, and welcome to A Course in Miracles TV. My name is Robin Duncan, and I am your host. Our topic today is Living A Course in Miracles, and I have two wonderful guests with me. Their names are Gary and Cindy Renard. Let me tell you about this amazing couple. Gary is the best-selling author of The Disappearance of the Universe, Your Immortal Reality, Love Has Forgotten No One, and his newest book called The Lifetimes When Jesus and Buddha Knew Each Other. Gary was born on the North Shore of Massachusetts, and during the harmonic convergence of 1987, he heard a calling and began to take his life in a spiritual direction. At the beginning of the 90s, he moved to Maine, where he had a powerful spiritual awakening. As instructed, he slowly and carefully wrote The Disappearance of the Universe over a period of 9 years. His books are now in 22 languages and growing. This acclaimed teacher of A Course in Miracles has been described as one of the most interesting and courageous spiritual speakers in the world. Cindy Laura Renard is an international speaker on A Course in Miracles. She is the author of A Course in Health and Well-Being. Her book has already been published in 6 languages. She has a newly released second book called The Business of Forgiveness. In addition, she is a spiritual life coach with a master's degree in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. She is a visionary with musical talent. She has been traveling around the world with her husband Gary, helping to introduce the teachings of A Course in Miracles to people all around the world. Together, Cindy and Gary also teach online classes on A Course in Miracles every month. Cindy uses her knowledge of the Course, as well as music and psychology, as healing tools to help others awaken from the dream of separation and into the higher octaves of life. I am so grateful to talk with you today. You have so much to be proud of. Thank you for taking this time to share your spiritual journey with us and how A Course in Miracles has blessed your life. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Rob.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that great introduction, which we wrote. And I really appreciate it. Yeah.
You're so welcome. You know, our topic today is about living A Course in Miracles. So to get us started, can you share how you first came across the book? How about you, Gary?
Well, I was introduced to A Course in Miracles in a very unconventional way. I was living in Maine at the time, and I was almost 42 years old. And I had been on a spiritual path for about 15 years. And I got into meditation. I felt like I had gotten very good at it. And I would meditate for about an hour and a half a day. And one day I came out of my meditation, and there were 2 people sitting there on my living room couch. There was this very, very beautiful, amazing, exquisite-looking woman was sitting there. And some guy, I didn't look at him too much, but they started to speak. Now, you may ask right away, why didn't you go running out of the room screaming? When there were these 2 people who apparently materialized from out of nowhere because the doors were locked, I knew they didn't sneak in. And I think what relaxed me was that the look on their face was so peaceful that it kind of like rubbed off on me, and it relaxed me, and it made me feel good. And it wasn't until the second visit, because they said that they were going to come back in a week. The first visit was very short. The second visit was much longer. And at the end of that visit, they told me that I was going to start studying this thing called A Course in Miracles, and that they were going to come back and tell me about it. And I didn't know if I believed them at first, and I didn't like the idea of people telling me what to do. Yet there I was 3 days later, buying my first copy of A Course in Miracles. And I picked it up and I started reading it, and it was like, it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. It might as well have been written in a foreign language. But over a period of years and 17 visits, they explained it to me in such a way that I could actually understand it. And in the process, we did this book, The Disappearance of the Universe, which they told me that I was going to do. And I was not a writer, and I didn't want to write a book. I was a musician. My dream would have been to write a hit song. That would have been my dream. So I write a hit song, and it sells, 10 million copies, and I was going to move to Hawaii and drink beer. That would be my
I can relate. I'm a songwriter as well.
And unfortunately for me, but then eventually, fortunately for me, the Holy Spirit had other plans, and my life went in a totally different direction than I expected it to.
Did these two beings identify themselves? Were they angels? Did this just blow your mind? I mean, that's magnificent. Who were they?
They described themselves as ascended masters, and they also said, eventually, this is over time, the woman explained that 2,000 years ago, she was St. Thomas, one of the closest followers of Jesus. The guy said that 2,000 years ago, he was St. Thaddeus, also a very close disciple of Jesus. And they talked about those times, 2,000 years ago, and the Gospel of Thomas, which they were very close to, obviously. And it was very interesting. So they kept my attention. And then after a while, I started, writing the book. And it was mostly the conversations that we had. I think the hard part for me in my books is capturing my experience. So I do narration and my notes that I insert. And that's the hardest part for me, is to really capture my experience. So sometimes it takes me a long time, and I have to go over it 4 or 5 times. But I do feel that by the time a book is done, it has captured what was really going on for me at the time. And not just the teachings, but how I was trying to apply the teachings in my everyday life, in the relationships, the situations that you find yourself in, even the events that you see on television. There's a certain kind of forgiveness that is not the way that the world traditionally thinks about it, that you can apply. And if you apply these teachings, then you will advance light years in your spirituality. And if you don't apply them, it doesn't matter how much you know. There's an old Chinese saying that to know and yet not do is to not yet know. So if you don't do it, if you don't really apply it, you're not getting anywhere. But if you do, then you're doing yourself quite a favor.
Wow, what an extraordinary experience. So for those that may not know, then those 17 visits and everything you were taught and what you were learning from the course, that's all in The Disappearance of the Universe. That's where people can find it?
That's right. And it turned out to be a fairly long book, but, people tell me it goes by fast when you read it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I can only imagine. Well, how about you, Cindy? How did the Course in Miracles find its way in your heart?
Well, my story of finding the Course is not quite as dramatic as Mary's, but it's pretty a typical example of how one can find the Course. But my story is in my early 20s. I was in the spiritual buffet line, like a lot of people do. You read all kinds of books, and I was reading everything I could get my hands on in regards to spirituality. And I would go to this local bookstore probably every week, and I'd go right to the New Age section. And every time I went there, and this probably happened for a couple years, I would see this big blue book called A Course in Miracles on the shelf. And I would always be drawn to it. I would take it off the shelf. I would open it to like the first couple pages and read the first few lines, which says, "Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God." And I'd say, what the heck does that mean? And I would look at some of the pages, and I had no idea what it was saying, but I was so intrigued by it. But I always put it back on the shelf, and I'd go home, and I'd always be thinking about it. I'd go back again to the bookstore, take it off the shelf, look at the first few pages. This happened for like a couple years, till one day something just nudged me in a big way to just get it, just buy this book. So I buy the book. It sat on my shelf for another 2 years until my mother asked me to borrow my copy of the course because she started to hear about it from her circle of friends. So I gave it to her. She started reading the course, going to a course study group, doing the workbook lessons, was telling me all about it and sharing with me what she was learning. And I was really intrigued by it. And then one day she gave me, or really told me about Gary's first book, The Disappearance of the Universe, that she had heard about in her course study group. She read it. She said, Cindy, you've got to read this book. It explains A Course in Miracles really well.
So you read the book before you met?
I read Gary's first book before I met him.
Wow.
And
so
then
that's how it came together.
It did. And then I really got interested in really exploring the course in more depth. That's when I started doing the workbook. This was back in 2005. And I was off and running. Once I read his book and then started doing the workbook lessons, there's no way I could turn back. And that was my path. I knew that it was a spiritual path that I'd been seeking. It had all the answers that I had ever asked about everything.
Wonderful. Anna came with a husband.
A pretty good package deal, I would say.
What a bonus.
Package deal. Yep. But little did I know, when I read The Disappearance of the Universe, I had no idea what was about to unfold. I mean, both Gary and I were married at the time. But we knew our relation, those marriages were ending. So we met at the right time. And the rest is history. I mean, we ended up, now we're teaching the course together and traveling the world together, doing online classes together, and it's working out great.
That fills my heart. I love hearing that you two are doing this together. Kind of similarly, I found the course through my friend Terry, who's now my husband. And he would just have these words, like every time we would pray or I would have some kind of challenge going on, he would whip out these beautiful words. And I would say, how do you know what to say in your prayers? This was back in the mid-90s. And he would just say, oh, it's not me. It's this book I'm reading. It's called A Course in Miracles. And I thought, I have to get a copy of that book. So similarly, we ended up married. And now we're going on 20 years, so pretty exciting. And it's our second marriage as well. Our funny little quirky story is that I was married to a Terry in my first marriage, and he was married to a Robin in his first marriage. So that's pretty fun, right? So God just keeps it simple, and it's easy on the in-laws, right? That you don't have to change names, you don't have to remember anything new. So it worked out really well.
That's really interesting, actually.
It is. Those signs in life that you have to pay attention to, right?
That's right.
All right. Well, for those of us who are studying the course, we know it is a very big teaching. It is filled with helpful information on how to heal every aspect of your life. And just one of the many benefits that it teaches is how to release from fear and have a much greater sense of peace. What would you say is one of your most valuable learnings from the course? Something you were able to implement that really helped you in your life?
I can go first.
I'll have Gary go first and I'll follow. Okay.
Great.
You mentioned the word big, which we kind of planned ahead of time that we wanted to mention that because Course in Miracles is a very big teaching. It's not the little teaching that most of its teachers present it as. The magnitude of it is enormous. I'll give you an example. It talks about removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. You have to realize that your natural inheritance in the Course is nothing less than the kingdom of heaven. All of it. And when it talks about removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, well, it's not that heaven has gone anywhere. It hasn't. It's right here, right now. The truth has not gone anywhere. But the truth is a constant. It's something that doesn't shift or change. It's always been there. And it's out of people's awareness. It's being blocked by this thing that we'll call the ego. So the ego has kind of like put up a smokescreen, a very convincing one, in between you and the truth. And that's a spatial idea. Of course, the truth is everywhere, just like God is everywhere, because God is the truth, according to A Course in Miracles, and nothing else is. And when it talks about removing the blocks, that has to do with undoing the ego. So right away you could think that you have two different identities, and only one of them is true, just as you have two different seeming realities, but only one of them is true, which is why the Course says be vigilant only for God and his kingdom. So the way the Course works is you undo the false you, which is the ego, and then eventually the real you will be all that's left. And then you will experience the kingdom of heaven, which is already here, and which in fact you have never left. As the Course says, you are at home in God, dreaming of exile, but perfectly capable of awakening to reality. And the way that you awaken by undoing the ego and becoming aware of your reality is through this certain kind of forgiveness. And I just wanted to mention, because I mentioned before that the Gospel of Thomas was very near and dear to my teachers. And all of this reminds me of something that Jesus said 2,000 years ago in the Gospel of Thomas. And by the way, if anybody's watching this and they don't know, Jesus is the voice of the Course in Miracles. And he hasn't changed his teachings at all. And there's a saying in the Gospel of Thomas where the disciples go up to Jesus. And we said, when will the kingdom come? And he said, well, it will not come by watching for it. It will not be said, behold here or behold there. Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. Well, the reason that they don't see it is because it's out of their awareness. The only way to become aware of it is to undo the blocks to it. And as you undo your ego through a certain kind of forgiveness, which I'm sure we'll get into eventually, then that kingdom of heaven, your reality, which is a changeless reality, becomes more and more a part of your awareness, to the point where eventually your identity will shift from the idea of being a body to the idea of being what you really are and where you really are. And what you really are is something that is immortal. It's invulnerable. It's something that can't be threatened by anything in this world, something that is bigger than the universe of time and space. When the Course starts off by saying nothing real can be threatened, that's what it's talking about. It's talking about nothing less than your reality, which it is possible for you to experience, even while you appear to be here. And I say appear to be here because you're not here. That's a trick of the ego. Einstein described it as an optical delusion of consciousness. You're not really in a body. So the antidote to the ego, as the Course might put it, which, the big word is the atonement, but the way it puts it many times is, I am not a body. I'm free. For I am still as God created me. But if you're still as God created you, then you are just like God, because God doesn't do different. God doesn't do separation. The ego believes in separation, and in fact believes that it has separated itself from its creator. The Holy Spirit, on the other hand, which is the voice for God in this illusion, is teaching us that the truth is we never really left heaven. And that's why we're innocent. Despite all the things that we think we've done and said, we haven't really done anything. But the way to get in touch with that is to see it everywhere, the way that the Holy Spirit sees it. And that brings us to the subject of forgiveness, which I'm sure we'll get into.
We sure will. Once you started to realize those things, and there's such deep, profound learnings that we actually once knew and now we're remembering again. And how did that change your personal life? Did it affect your daily life, your relationships, your financial situation? Did it change your earth life?
Oh, not too much at first, because one of the things you have to learn about A Course in Miracles is that it's done completely at the level of the mind. The Course says this is a course in mind training. This is a course in cause and not effect. Mind is cause. So it says, seek not to change the world, seek rather to change your mind about the world. Now, that may not sound too practical at first, but it actually is. If you look at things like workbook lesson number 23, my thoughts are images that I've made. Your thoughts are making what you're seeing. And the course's focus is on changing the thoughts, changing the mind. And it says, when you do this, you are dealing with the cause. It says there is no point in trying to change the world. Being an effect, it is incapable of change. But there is a lot of sense in changing your thoughts about the world. Now you are dealing with the cause, and the effect will change automatically. So your focus has shifted, from the effect to the cause. And actually, that's where your real power is.
Did it feel like you became more peaceful within yourself? Or what would you say are the tangible benefits of just diving into this material and seeing what's in there?
I'll answer that, but then I'm going to let Cindy speak. It's
Sure,
like
sure.
you become more peaceful at first through this kind of forgiveness that we're going to describe. Now,
Right.
that doesn't sound like such a big deal at first, but the Course teaches that a tranquil mind is not a little gift.
Exactly.
It's a huge gift. You can think more clearly. It opens you up to inspiration from the Holy Spirit. The word inspired comes from the words in spirit.
Right.
And you start to work with the Holy Spirit, and you have, all of a sudden, sometimes when you're trying to make things work in this illusion, you'll get inspired ideas that will actually help you and become very practical and tell you how to make things work, how to make your life better. And the irony is that that's not the purpose of A
Right.
Course in Miracles, but it happens anyway. It's
Kind of a natural benefit, right?
right. The Song of Prayer section of the Course describes it as the echoes of God's love. It says these are secondary. The Song of Prayer in the Course is a song of love and thanksgiving, and you forget about the things that you think you need. The irony is that later you get these echoes from it, and you get these inspired ideas that will tell you sometimes exactly what you should do and where you should go.
Exactly.
I never thought that I would leave New England and move to California and be living in Hollywood with this beautiful woman. I mean, I didn't know that was going to happen. But
That's quite a blessing, right?
Yeah. But that was the guidance of the
That's
Holy
great.
Spirit, which I'm very grateful for.
Well, I know for me, the level of peace is so much higher. It's indescribable how much more inner peace I have, how much less fear I have, how much less anxiety I have, how much I feel like I have a sense of direction in anything I do. So there is such a tangible benefit to this beautiful study. Like you say, it's not necessarily the purpose, but it's definitely a byproduct that is a wonderful blessing. So how about you, Cindy? How has it just touched your life in a personal way?
Wow. I am a much more calm and peaceful person today than I was before I started practicing the Course. And what I mean by that is things that used to really push my buttons, really bother me, don't bother me anymore. And that's one way that I could tell that forgiveness works. I've been practicing the kind of forgiveness the Course teaches for 15 years now, daily. I practice with anything that comes up that disturbs my peace. And we'll get into forgiveness in a minute and what it really is. The biggest takeaway that has helped me from the Course is understanding the relationship between cause and effect. That cause is mind. The world, which is the illusion, is the effect. Once you really know that, you would know that there's nothing outside you, not only that really exists, but there's nothing outside of you that could be the cause of your upset. So the Course has helped me to really make that switch, perform the miracle, which in A Course in Miracles, the miracle is a shift in perception from the ego to the Holy Spirit's interpretation, which says that ultimately we must understand and recognize that there is nothing outside, nothing that can take away the peace of God in our minds, unless we give it the power. That one idea has saved me from all kinds of suffering. Knowing that I have a choice, and the Course speaks about the power of decision that we have. That's our one remaining power we have in this world, is the power to choose which teacher we're choosing as we look upon the world. How are we interpreting the world we see? The Course says there are only two interpretations, only two. One is the ego's interpretation, which makes the world real, which means that the world would be the cause of your upset. Or we can choose the Holy Spirit, which overlooks form, overlooks the world, and sees past the illusion and our misperceptions, and where we recognize that we're all the Christ as one mind. We're all innocent because we've never really left our true home. We've never left God. And those ideas, when you start to practice those in your everyday life, with the understanding that what's the purpose behind everything we do? Are we using our lives and even the challenges in our lives for the Holy Spirit's purpose or the ego's purpose? When that's your starting point, before you make any decisions, right? I've asked myself, well, where am I first when I have a challenging situation? Am I in my right mind, Holy Spirit mind, or I'm in my wrong mind? Because whichever frame of mind I'm in, that's the experience I'm going to have then of the world. So the most important thing I've realized is to get my mind in order first.
When we think about those two voices, and some people might say, well, my mind is so busy that I can't ever hear that other voice. I'm always in fear. I'm always worrying. I'm always anxious. And what would you say, Cindy, for people, how can they calm their minds so maybe they could hear a little bit of that other voice?
Well, the Course talks about removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. The blocks are thoughts that we're thinking with the ego, which are thoughts that come from guilt. So practicing true forgiveness in our everyday lives undoes those blocks. So you can hear, right? The ego's voice starts to dissolve more and more. And so you can hear, all that's left is the voice of God in your mind that you can connect to. But it's about removing those blocks, which the blocks can show up as grievances we're holding against others. It shows up as the judgments we have about ourselves or others that we need to look at and inquire, go within and ask ourselves what those thoughts are providing for us. Are they really benefiting us to hold on to those? And working with forgiving them. When you do that every day and forgive those thoughts, you start to remove the barriers to hearing more clearly. So for me, true forgiveness and practicing that is what has helped me to hear. Now, there's some general exercises one can do that will help. Obviously going into getting yourself quiet, finding the quiet center within you where the Holy Spirit resides and really tuning in, practicing that will also allow you to hear the voice better. Practicing a form of prayer called true prayer, where you're getting quiet, but you're joining with God, not asking for anything, but being grateful and recognizing you already have everything and all the answers are within you. And it's sort of about being in a state of gratitude and love for maybe 5 minutes. And practicing this, also is a way of undoing the ego and the blocks, because you're rejoining with what you really are, the Christ Spirit. But when you do that along with every day when you get up in the morning, maybe practicing turning your day over to the Holy Spirit, remembering that the Holy Spirit's in charge. You're not really in charge. The Holy Spirit's in charge. Surrendering your day to Spirit, and then letting the rest of your day unfold, but maintaining that sense of awareness that, again, the Holy Spirit's always in charge. And you can always come back to that. So those things combined are a great way to start. But remember, it takes practice. So this is not something that happens overnight. It's a process over time.
It sure does.
I'd like to add one thing, if I may. When the Course says this is a course in mind training, it's very serious about that. In fact, it says an untrained mind can accomplish nothing. That's a pretty provocative statement, because it's saying that 99% of the people in the world are accomplishing basically nothing with their spirituality. The mind has to be trained, because the mind is like a wild animal. You said it yourself a couple of minutes ago. People's minds are going like crazy, and they can't hear the Holy Spirit. Well, the mind has to be trained. And the workbook of the Course in Miracles is a great place to start, because it does slowly but surely calm your mind. It does slowly but surely give you an approach to God, who you never really left, but there was this unconscious fear of God in the mind that you didn't know about, that can be traced all the way back to the original idea of separation and the beginning of time, which forgiveness undoes all of that. People, they hear the word mind training, the words, and they get a little bit apprehensive because to some people that sounds kind of like brainwashing. And the truth is, they've already been brainwashed. They've already been brainwashed by the ego into believing this delusional system, as the Course calls it. And what you want to do is kind of like deprogram the ego and get back to reality. So that mind training actually leads you home.
Excellent. You know, it is a practice, because without the practice, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, when we do that daily practice, it does get easier. You know, for those people that have the very busy mind and just feel like you can't calm it down, there's so many different things you can do. And I love what you were saying about just taking that quiet time, even if it's 5 minutes. You know, one exercise might be just imagine a white blanket in your mind, and you're just leaving all your thoughts at the perimeter, and you're just sitting on that white blanket in your mind, and you're just making room for higher wisdom to come to you. And I think Holy Spirit recognizes that great effort and feels that invitation. So just know, everyone, that you don't need to have it perfect. You don't need to get it just right. But that effort of trying to make room for that higher understanding will bring such great rewards. You know, we learn through the Course that our thoughts and our beliefs are creating or miscreating all the time. And the world we see is a projection of those thoughts and beliefs, or a reflection of those. I think for me, I used to believe that it wasn't okay to make a mistake. I was very hard on myself, and any mistake, I had a list in my pocket. I knew about all of my mistakes. And today I am much more forgiving towards myself. I'm actually working on instant forgiveness for myself and for others whenever I'm tempted to judge. And this has made such a huge difference. You know, you've talked about true forgiveness. How can we do that in relationships? Like, I know we're trying to get from a relationship which the Course calls special all the way over to what's called a holy relationship. What would you say is what we can do for true forgiveness, even in terms of our relationships?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think it's important to understand that first and foremost, with the Course's version of forgiveness, the forgiveness the Course is describing is quite different from the world's traditional view of forgiveness. So it says that we're really forgiving people, not because they've really done something, but because we're forgiving them because they haven't really done anything, because they're really innocent, because none of us have really left God. The separation hasn't occurred. So at the highest level, when we understand that, it's going to make the practical application of forgiveness here easier once we get, you know, what forgiveness really means. The Course is saying when we're forgiving, attempting to forgive someone, it looks like we're forgiving another body. What we're really forgiving is the contents in our own mind. The Course explains there's not really any people. It's our projection. So if forgiveness is never between people. It's always about correcting our misperceptions. So again, and accepting responsibility that we're the cause of our own upsets. So in step one would be identify the cause of your upset. We're never really upset for the reason we think. So let's say in my relationship with Gary, let's say he does something and I get triggered. The first step in forgiveness would be to recognize, well, identify the cause of this upset. It's not Gary or something he appeared to do that's upsetting me. It's my choice for the ego to interpret it with the ego. It's my projection. I wouldn't be upset unless I first didn't have that upset already within my mind, or else I wouldn't be upset. So there's something in me something that needs to be healed. So I identify that the cause of my upset is, well, I chose the ego as my teacher. I'm not looking at this correctly. I don't have to take what Gary appeared to say or do personally. So I identify the cause, then I let go of my interpretation of what I think the problem is, and recognize that the problem that I have made up is not even a real problem. The Course says that the only real problem is the sense of separation from God. I somehow let this person, whoever it is, take away the peace of God within me. That's what needs correction. So I take responsibility for my projection, and then I let it go into the Holy Spirit's hands, knowing that the miracle, which that is the miracle, that the Holy Spirit then takes my forgiveness and holds it in the mind till it's ready to be accepted.
Since you're quite advanced in this material, which I just love, I could just listen to you all day long. What about the person that's new at this? And let's say somebody has done something or said something, they hurt their feelings, they did something terrible or unthinkable, and they already rushed into the judgment. They're already really upset and their face is turning red. Like, how can they stop that runaway train? Do you have any just simple tips for how they can just get back on track?
Sure. By the way, all those situations and circumstances that you just described, according to the Course, they're all the same. Yeah. And the one real problem is separation. And so all the ego's problems are based on separation and differences. And the ego loves differences because the ego likes this idea of separation and wants to keep its identity going. And, so one of the ways that it does it is it has differences. How can you have judgment without differences? And without judgment, you won't have anything because it's judgment that makes it real. So let me give you a very quick example. Let's say I'm driving down the freeway here in LA. Somebody cuts me off in traffic and I want to go, and in the old days, I might even, give the guy the finger or whatever. And by the way, this is where the Course can be very practical, because let's say that I did react like that. And what if that guy has a gun, right? I could be dead. This is why the Course can be very practical sometimes. By practicing the Course, I'm still alive. So I go to react. This is the first step in forgiveness. With mind training, doing the workbook, practicing, I stop myself. Instead of reacting with the ego, I stop myself. That's the first step. If you can do that, then you can take the critical step in forgiveness, which is choosing the right teacher. This is what the Course would call the holy instant. That instant where you choose the right teacher, the Holy Spirit, instead of the wrong teacher. And the Holy Spirit has a totally different story about what's going on here. And the Holy Spirit would say, okay, you were upset. Well, the reason that you were upset was because you were making it real. How do I know? Because if you weren't making it real, you wouldn't be upset. So what you got to do, and this is a cardinal thing in the Course, you got to stop making it real. Instead of giving truth to our illusions, we have to surrender our illusions to the truth, which in this case is the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit would say, look, remember the principle of the atonement in the Course. The truth is the separation never occurred. It never happened. You're still at home in God. You're having this dream. And by the way, this is a critical distinction between the Course and many other things. The Course does an excellent job of refining the idea that this is an illusion to the idea that this is a dream that you will awaken from. And it's that awakening that is enlightenment. It's that awakening that is salvation. But in order to do that, you have to realize that you're dreaming. You can't wake up if you don't know that you're dreaming. So one of the essential elements is to realize, okay, I'm dreaming, so now I'm going to forgive this person, not because they really did something. I'm going to forgive this person because they haven't really done anything, because this is my dream. The dream is not being done to me. If great masters like Jesus and Buddha understood anything, they understood that the world was not being done to them. It was being done by them. If the world is being done to you, then that puts you in a defensive posture, and you're a victim. And if this world was made by God, you would be a victim of a force that is outside of you that did it to you. But as the Course teaches, I'm not a victim of the world I see. So now we forgive people, not because they've really done something, but because they haven't really done anything, because it's our projection, and we can let it go, and then we can switch to the Holy Spirit, and then there's a third step that we'll move on to eventually.
Someone might say, well, okay, I'm going to forgive this person that cut me off. Instead of flipping them off, I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to practice recognizing that I am looking at what didn't actually happen and all that. But what would you say are the practical benefits of doing that? Like, why should somebody do that? Like, what's the difference?
Okay, so I'll have to finish describing the forgiveness process.
Perfect.
So what you do is now you're listening to the right teacher. And I've already described one of the practical benefits of doing this. And inspiration, by the way, is also a result of this, which is another good reason why you should do it. Being more peaceful leads to thinking more clearly, better health, happiness. And one of the reasons for that is that, as you'll see in the third step, that this forgiveness looks like you're forgiving somebody else, but the benefits of it are actually going to you. And the reason for that is because of the way that the mind works. I won't get into a long description of it, but let's just say that if you got down deep enough into the mind, you would realize that there's only one mind, that there's really only one of them. As the Hindus would say, there's only the one appearing as many. You know, there's one ego that thinks that it's here. Even though it looks like there's 7.8 billion people out there, there's really just one of us, and you're it. It isn't somebody else. Now, because of that, your unconscious mind will interpret anything that you think about somebody else to really be about you. The Course describes this with a very important law of the mind. Jesus says in the Course, as you see him, you will see yourself. And it must be pretty important, because then it says, never forget this. In that person, you'll either find yourself or lose yourself. So if you're thinking that they really did it, and that they're guilty, then your unconscious mind, which knows everything anyway, because that's where the projection is coming from in the first place, your unconscious mind will interpret that to mean that you are guilty and that everything you think that you ever did for eternity actually happened, and that you deserve to be punished and everything that goes along with guilt. But if you're thinking that they're innocent, and if it's true that as you see them, you will see yourself, then you will experience the innocence that comes along as a benefit of your forgiveness. I want to mention there's a third step, which most Course students never take.
We definitely need all three steps, so please continue.
This is what the Course would call vision, with a capital V. My teachers, Arden and Percy, describe it as spiritual sight. It's the same thing. What you do is you overlook the body, you overlook the illusion, knowing that it's not true, and you replace it with something. And this is so important. It's not enough to just describe the problem. You've got to replace it with the truth. You've got to replace it with reality. If you stop it, oh, the world is an illusion, the world is an illusion, that will get you nowhere. You have to replace it with reality. You overlook the body, and you think of that person as being what they really are and where they really are. Now, the Course teaches that spirit, real spirit, I'm not talking about the idea of an individual soul. Real spirit, according to the Course, is perfect oneness. You know, the Holy Spirit thinks in terms of oneness. The ego thinks in terms of separation. The Holy Spirit thinks in terms of perfect oneness, overlooks the body, and thinks of that person as being nothing less than God. You know, spirit is not a partial attribute, so that person is not part of it, they're all of it. That's why I started off by saying that what you really are is something that's bigger than the universe of time and space. You are nothing less than God, and God is all of it. Now, that may sound arrogant to some people to say, oh, I'm the same as God. That's like saying that you are God. But no, that's not arrogance according to the Course. According to the Course, arrogance is to think that you can be separate from God, that you can separate yourself from your Creator and take on this individual existence and personal identity that you thought you were. That's the arrogance of the ego. The Course is undoing that and saying it never happened, and what you really are is exactly the same as God, but the way for you to experience that is to see it everywhere. So the Course says everywhere the Holy Spirit looks, he sees himself. The Holy Spirit sees innocence everywhere by overlooking the body. And by the way, that's the way that Jesus healed people 2,000 years ago. He didn't dwell on the nature of their illness, which he also explains in the Manual for Teachers in the Course. He overlooked the body, joined with that person at the level of the mind, and reminded them what they really are and where they really are, which is this divine creation of God, perfect, innocent, and totally worthy of being in heaven with God. And that is how we forgive, and that's also how the miracle heals according to the Course.
I love that, just overlooking the body. So Cindy, what do you think about people that might be in a conflicted relationship, which A Course in Miracles would call that special relationship that's more about the ego? They're trying to get to that more harmonious relationship. Maybe it's with a spouse or a partner or a son or a daughter, mother, father. Like, what can they do as they're practicing true forgiveness that would really make a difference and help them get to a better place in this relationship?
Good question. I think in addition to forgiveness, which forgiveness really does undo all that, and when we do forgive, it does help us make our, quote, special relationships holy, because the key is asking ourselves, what purpose is the relationship serving? That's probably the most important question we can ever ask, and that will tell you right there, if you're really honest and do that self-inquiry, what is the purpose of this relationship? What do I want to come of this relationship? So get very clear on that. The ego will tell us a completely different story than the Holy Spirit. In a special relationship, the ego always seeks to get something from someone else that it thinks it's lacking. And it places the responsibility on the other person, right? So we want to look at that. We have to look at that honestly and see what we're doing in the relationship. We have to, sort of as Gary said, we have to catch ourselves when we're in that mode. We have to catch ourselves when we start to feel even mildly annoyed and upset. And we start asking, well, if I'm feeling this way, well, why am I feeling this way? It must be how I'm thinking about this. And then we can remember that there's another way to look at this. I don't have to see this person as someone that I need to complete me or even fulfill me. The key is that you can be whole and experience your wholeness in and of itself. Then the relationship just becomes a bonus. You're with that person because you just want to share your life with them, not because you really are lacking something and you need to get it from this person. So the Course is very empowering because it says, no, you are first and foremost, you are already whole. Once we start to get that, and true forgiveness helps us to experience that we're already whole. We don't have to seek anything outside of ourselves for that. So that's for starters, but we have to be aware when we're in whatever relationship, it starts by starting to recognize those moments when we're not at peace. That's the only way we'll know that we can change our mind about it and start saying, well, what purposes am I using even this moment for? You know right away by how you feel. Your mood will tell you. Your mood will tell you what teacher you're choosing, and then you can go, I must have chosen the ego. That's why I'm upset. But I have another way now. I can look at this differently. I don't have to settle for this puny little interpretation of myself and the other person. I can rise above this, above the battleground, as the Course says, and look at this from a neutral place without judgment.
Well, I think what I'm hearing from both of you is the importance of self-reflection. Not that it's up to us to heal ourselves, but to kind of catch that runaway train a little bit and say, what is it I'm really trying to do? What am I trying to get to? What's really going on here? And, just to put a little pause between you and the situation to make room for that higher understanding. What about fear? And then I'd love for you to share a couple of your miracle stories today. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but let's say somebody is really afraid about something. Do either one of you have a go-to quote in A Course in Miracles, something that could just bring calm to their mind right now, today?
Well, if the Course is saying anything, it's saying don't make it real. If you find yourself being the slightest bit upset or annoyed or anything, you're making it real, or else you wouldn't feel that way. And I want to emphasize that the Course says that it's simple. Yes, and it is. And it doesn't just say it once. It uses the word simple 158 times. Not once does it say that it's easy. It's simple because there are only two things to choose between, really. There's reality and unreality. But it's difficult because your forgiveness has to apply literally to everybody, without exception. He said the Holy Spirit thinks in terms of oneness. You can't let one person not be forgiven, or else you are not completely forgiven. So it becomes an attitude. With practice, these steps merge into one, and you're in that state of what the Course calls miracle readiness. You're ready to forgive anything. Now, if you do that, the fear that you're talking about will eventually dissipate. At one point, the Course talks about the withering attacks of the ego. As you practice and go along, and as the ego is undone, you become less fearful. You start to really believe some of the workbook lessons. The Course says, there is nothing to fear. And then it says, this statement is literally true. But you're never going to feel that way as long as you keep making it real. You've got to replace the dream with the reality and the recognition of reality that eventually awakens you from the dream with this kind of forgiveness. That's why fear will start to dissipate. That's why, when my first book came out 17 years ago, I was scared to death of the idea of speaking in front of people. I refused to speak in front of people the first 6 months that the book was out. And my publisher was getting a little concerned about this. And he said, Gary, at least try it. People have questions, and if you don't answer those questions, they're going to make up their own answers. And I didn't like the idea, but I did it. And the first 4 or 5 times, it was difficult, but I saw it for what it was. It was a forgiveness opportunity. And by practicing exactly the same kind of forgiveness that I'm describing on the idea of getting up in front of these people who I eventually started to understand, these aren't real people. It's my projection. I'm really just talking to myself. And I'd say after 4 or 5 times practicing forgiveness, I start to feel quite comfortable with it. And it got to the point where speaking to people and getting up in front of a crowd was no more stressful than brushing my teeth. And that's the way it should be. And it can be that way with anything. There is literally nothing to fear. And eventually that has to apply to anything you can think of, even death. The last 2 obstacles to peace in A Course in Miracles are the fear of death and the fear of God. And the reason it's that way is because the 2 go hand in hand. If you didn't fear God, which most people are not in touch with because it's unconscious, but if you could undo that guilt that's in the mind that makes you fear God, then you would not fear death either. And in fact, you would not fear anything. So when the Course says, as Cindy put it, I'm never upset for the reason I think, you're undoing the real causes of your fear with this kind of forgiveness as you undo the ego. And that leads to a peace that eventually will be permanent and will result in your awakening to your permanent reality with God, which will become real in your experience.
Well, that is a huge benefit, right? We need that. We can all use that.
Being more peaceful and happy and inspired, that alone would be worth doing. The course would be worth doing if those were the only benefits. But then, as you go along, you get to actually awaken in God and return home to your permanent reality, which you can begin to experience even while you appear to be here. It looks like you're walking around in a body, but you can start to experience your reality as spirit, and the body becomes more like a dream figure that you feel less and less, and you start to experience reality more and more.
I can say for myself that I am happier, healthier, and definitely more peaceful than I've ever been in my life. So I'm so grateful to the teachings of the Course and for teachers like you too. How about you, Cindy? Do you have a miracle story that you could share with us that touched your life?
Oh, gosh. By the way, we could go on forever with the Course.
I would love it.
It's such a big teaching. I mean, there's so much to cover. But
can't wait to have you back again. We will.
Part two. It's practically a miracle that I'm sitting here talking about A Course in Miracles. I mean, and even standing up in front of groups of people sharing Jesus's message, what he was really teaching 2,000 years ago. If someone told me I'd be doing this, 15, 20 years ago, I would not be able to relate. Not to the teachings necessarily, but to me personally getting up and standing up in front of a group of people is practically a miracle. I, like Gary, was very, very shy. I never felt comfortable standing and giving speeches in front of people. I have had tremendous anxiety for the first half of my life on panic attacks, which I've learned to really, really, really undo that anxiety and fear in such a big way through the practice of forgiveness. So if it ever shows its face, I know what to do. I don't judge it. I don't make it real, but yet I'm normal and I do the normal things I would do to help myself. But I certainly don't judge it. And that one thing alone is a miracle, because the miracle is really a shift in perception. So it's not like you have to get rid of things. That would just make it real too. Even fear, just look at it. You observe it without the judgment produces amazing benefits, because you're not making yourself guilty for having a human experience. Everybody has their stuff that comes up. So the key is we have to be gentle with ourselves and patient with ourselves, be the observer of ourselves, watch it, but watch our judgments. Do we feel guilty? That if you feel guilty, so if I felt guilty for having anxious moments, that hurts my mind. So it's not, I can have anxious moments, but be the observer of it and not judge it, forgive it. That's what heals it over time.
Look what it's done for you, though, that you go from a place of being shy or just not really ready to get out there in front of people. And now you've written all these books and you're teaching all over the world. And it's that you're allowing that light that shines through you to extend. And I know in A Course in Miracles, there's a lot about extension versus projection. So I love that you're out there extending everything that you're learning. And how about you, Gary? What's a miracle story you could share with us?
Well, let's remember, when the Course talks about choosing love instead of fear, it's talking about the love of God. And it's not talking about the little separated love of human beings. It's talking about all of it. And it's that has enabled me to overcome my fears. And I had plenty of them. Even though I was a professional musician, I couldn't get up on a stage unless I had my guitar. It's like my guitar was kind of like my defense in between me and the people that I was playing for. And when you stand up and speak by yourself, you don't have that. And so whether it's in personal relationships, like my relationship with Cindy, that never could have happened without the Course, because the first time that I saw her, and I relate this story in my fourth book, the first time I saw her, I couldn't even talk to her. So it's only through time and forgiveness that I could have a real relationship with Cindy. And I would recommend to anybody who has a hard time in relationships that it is possible to do anything you want. Not that that's what the Course is about, but there is a result that enables you to do anything you want without fear. You can be very successful, but it may not fit your pictures, because the Holy Spirit knows what's best for you and you don't. I used to think that I knew what was best for me, and I didn't. And the Holy Spirit had other plans and other ideas. So this is why, and this is the most important advice I can give people today, when you get up in the morning, put the Holy Spirit in charge of your day and try to listen every now and then. Just think of the Holy Spirit, and you establish a relationship with the Holy Spirit, and eventually you find yourself getting ideas that didn't really come from you. It's almost like they come from out of nowhere, and they're guidance. And you start to get into that relationship with the Holy Spirit. And, that is a miracle for me. If I didn't do that, if I didn't get into the habit of listening to the Holy Spirit, then I don't think that my life would have been very happy. But because of that relationship with the Holy Spirit, which comes naturally as you undo the ego, you hear the Holy Spirit more and more, then that is something that is priceless. And it can lead you to all kinds of good things. And it's not always going to be easy, because this is a world of duality. And sometimes it's going to be good, and sometimes it's going to be bad. When it's bad, that's when you really need to forgive. And we all know this has been one crazy, messed up year. And it's been a thing with a lot of forgiveness opportunities. But if you take advantage of them and undo the ego, then it actually does get more beautiful as you go along.
Such great advice. And I'm so glad the two of you found each other and that you're out there teaching in the world. We all win with that. So thank you for all that you do. Where can people find out about your wonderful books and events? Where do they go?
Well, for starters, they can go to our website. So I'll speak personally for me first. My website is cindylora.com. It's CINDYLORA.com. You can find out about books, CDs, counseling sessions, online classes. My 2 books can be found on Amazon, both in paperback and Kindle. My second book just came out. That's called The Business of Forgiveness. That's the real business we're in, healing yourself through the practice of A Course in Miracles. So if they're interested in that, Amazon.com.
Congratulations on your newest book. That is so exciting.
Thank you.
How about you, Gary? Where can they find your materials?
Oh, they can go to GaryRenard.com. That's GaryRenard. It's not Gary R. Renard. It's GaryRenard.com. And there's all kinds of stuff there about me, all the books, the CDs, my schedule of speaking, everything. And I just wanted to mention Cindy's new book is great. Don't miss it. And we're working on a book together about relationships. And I think that might be out hopefully by Valentine's Day.
You know what it's called yet?
I can't tell you yet. You know what it's called, but I can't tell you yet. And I'm working on slowly but surely on my 5th book with Arden in person. And I can't give you the title of that yet either, but it's about going all the way home. It's about finishing the job. So
all this co-creating with God just happening right in front of us. Excellent. Oh, thank you both. I so appreciate you joining me today. This has been so much fun. And thank you for everything you're doing to bring light and inspiration and bringing those teachings and principles of the Course into the world. And I've actually met several people who started studying A Course in Miracles just because of your books and teachings. So thank you for bringing everyone to the buffet, God's loving buffet. So I hope you'll come back again and again, and we can dive into more healing topics. And by then, people will have a chance to look at more of your materials and so much more to talk about. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here.
Thank you, Robin.
We really appreciate you having us and allowing us to share this information. So thank you.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much. This is Robin Duncan with A Course in Miracles TV. Be sure to check out our website at acourseinmiracles.tv for upcoming events and resources. This channel is offered for public benefit, and your support is so greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us today, and remember to expect miracles. Have a very blessed day.